Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Frederick Winsness with NetHope, and very pleased to welcome everyone to yet another NetHope Solutions Center webinar in the ICT4D webinar series. Today we're going to talk about rise of platforms in ICT4D, and we have a host of organizations here today that are going to contribute. I'm very pleased to have CRS here, obviously, who's the lead for the ICT4D conference. We have Boca, we have Salesforce.org, we have Danish Church Aid, and Berkeley University. And I believe I missed a couple organizations. There's quite a large panel we have here today. Before we get started, I just want to go over a little bit of housekeeping rules. We do want this to be interactive, so please do open up the chat window in WebEx. You do that by clicking on the third icon from the right on the bottom of your screen, and you should post your questions there to the panelists, and we will do a Q&A session towards the end of the hour today. We are also recording this today, so you will get a follow-up email with a link to where you can find the recording and the slides that are being presented today. And last but not least, at the end of the session today, you will see an online survey pop up in your web browser, and we certainly would appreciate you answering a few questions there for us. So, and with that, I think I'm just going to turn it over to the large panel, and Sonia Rutzel. She is with Catholic Relief Services and going to be the moderator today. So over to you, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Frederick, and thank you, NetHope, for facilitating this webinar. So as Frederick mentioned, we have a big group of expertise for you to discuss the use of platforms and how to make the right choices. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. They're in our running order. So we have Duncan Drury. He's an ICT consultant for DDICT Consulting and for NetHope. We have Miri Ramasitya-Toro. She's the head of monitoring and evaluation from ACDI Boca. We have Lori Freeman. She's the vice president of nonprofit industry solutions and strategy at Salesforce.org. We have Priscilla Chomba-Kinia. She's the Global Tech and Innovation Advisors for Dun Church Aid. Brian Sobel, he's a Senior Technical Advisor at Catholic Relief Services. And Natasha Beal, she's a Program Manager at the Center for Effective Global Action at the University of California. And so we have a lot of topics to go through, and there will be an interactive session. So we very much like to ask you to post any sessions in the chat if you have it for any speakers. We have a round of this question first, and then we'll take sessions from the audience. So it's my pleasure to introduce to pass on the first question to Duncan. How do I get?
Thanks very much, Sonia. Oh, I think we've got a bit of echo somewhere. Okay, so I'll get started. So I'm just giving a brief introduction to the rise of the platforms that we've seen. So I think over a very long time, really, humanitarian organisations have used information technology for collecting data in the field for lots of different users. So reporting to donors is a key one, managing programs, monitoring, evaluation and learning. That's something that we've all been involved with for a very, very long time. Over the last 15 years or so, things have started to change, and I think there have been some common pathways that many organisations have followed. We've seen a journey from lots of in-house developed systems or systems that were commissioned from third-party companies that were very, very specific to the organisations that had needed them, and they were often run in the agency's own data centres or in the field. And what we've seen over the last 15 years is a move away from this towards the use of cloud-based platforms such as Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics, to give 2 examples, or organizations customizing software as a service solutions which meet their needs. Obviously, within that, we're still seeing quite a few older solutions still in use, legacy solutions, and I think also an awful lot of Excel spreadsheets still around there, but we've definitely seen a move to using platforms for gathering information. As well as these changes that have been some back-end side changes, I think there's also been transformative change that's been enabled by the rise of mobile devices and touch interfaces, and so things like tablets and smartphones, and which have enabled quite a lot of different approaches to how data is collected in the field by staff and even by beneficiaries on the ground filling in data themselves. And then we've seen through these some increases in the efficiency of collecting data and much higher standards of accuracy for the data. So I'm really excited that we're here today to hear from a number of different organizations that have taken this journey and been in different ways, and hear from them where they currently have got to. I'm really looking forward to hearing from them and learning more. So yeah, I'd like to hand on to the next speaker, please.
Thank you very much, Duncan. And Miri, the next question is for you. We like to ask you, how do you choose the right tool for data collection? So when does it make sense to choose a platform based on data needs or the ecosystem, user skills, or budget? Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Hello, everyone. SCD Avoca is an NGO. We are a non-profit organization. So we mostly use data for both reporting to our donors, our beneficiaries, our stakeholders, our board, and as well for learning purposes. So as such, having a timely data is critical for us, and that's just what mobile-based data collection gives us. Plus, it gives us other capabilities to significantly increase the quality of the data in such a way that even if the data isn't massive or the collection is not too frequent, given that increase of the quality of the data, it's worth switching to mobile. So for me, the question is not mobile or not mobile. It's rather which platform. At SCD Avoca, we are using several platforms across our projects and countries. So what we usually consider as criteria to choose the platform for a specific project is, of course, the budget. Even if the budget for paper-based collection is in the long run more expensive than the mobile-based data collection, the budget for mobile data collection is still significant. So you start with assessing how much you can afford, for example, for the phone, the mobile device, what type of operating system. You have mobile platforms that accept both Android and iOS, but there are some that still accept, the non-smartphone type of mobile. So if you can only afford the very basic phones, then that will limit the platforms that you can choose. Another important factor in that budget is the subscription that you pay. You have free platforms now, but you also have the pay-in-one. If you begin, I would say start with the pay-in-ones, because the pay-in-ones would give you a dedicated support, help desk troubleshooting. You have less bugs, you have regular updates and upgrades. If you can pay a little bit more, they can even help you with the visualization of your data. There is certain how can I say, warranty in the in having your data available and not lost. And some of them offers as well some training opportunities, etc. And you have formal resources and materials to rely on to help you train your staff. The free ones is free, so that's a big advantage. You have many community resources on the internet. You can chat. You have many users usually, but there is no dedicated support. There is no dedicated like troubleshoot person, help desk that you could reach out to and say. And sometimes you have some bugs, and most of the times, if you want training, you still need to pay. Another consideration as well is if you want to take the pay-in-ones, so which ones of the pay-in-ones, you need to look at how many forms, how many data collection forms you are going to design, because some of the platforms, for example, Magpie, if any of you is familiar with Magpie, it's free up to 20 forms, up to 100 questions per data collection form, and 500 uploads, meaning 500 respondents per month, not more than that. If you have more than that, then you have to pay. Number of enumerators and users. Some platforms like Survey 123, for example, that is the ESRI, this GIS company, big, huge company. They bill you per user, per data collection person. And I mentioned already needs for training. If you want training, then you have to budget for that as well, depending on the platform. Something you may want to consider is the number of reviews or number of stars or score online whenever you download the app. For example, you have number of reviews that, for example, us, we always look at to take our decision. As well, you need to look at the data needs. What type of data would you need? Would you need something specific, like you need to scan barcodes? So you have a few mobile platforms now that allows you to scan barcodes or QR codes. GPS, do you want to upload or collect images or signatures? Do you want SMS capabilities? Or even on some platforms, you can use now, you can have the option to use IVR, interactive voice response. And as well, something to consider is the functions that you need. Do you need a live report? In which case you may want to go towards one platform or the other. Cascading. I mean, there are different types of capabilities from one mobile to the other. I will be happy to go further into that as well, in terms of what types of functions we could get, and as well the language needs. So most platforms now allows you to type the question in the language you want. But one thing to consider when we talk language is the resources, because some platforms offer resources in English only, while others you can have, in French, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in other languages. So yeah, overall, my advice is if you just begin, you're not sure of the capability of the staff, because the more open source, the more involvement there will be in terms of design of the collection forms, the upload of the data, etc. Even the live report. I would say start with the pay-in ones. If you just begin and start with the pay-in ones, if you're not sure of your capabilities or the capabilities of the staff, start with the pay-in ones. And using the criteria I mentioned above, feel free to choose which ones would be within your budget. And by doing so, you will start by using those paying platforms capabilities to create data collection forms on their website. So there is no scripts, no coding, nothing needed. Once you get more used to that, you could use the XLS forms. So it's forms created in Excel, but with a little bit of coding and scripts, but you will be more familiar of the capabilities of what mobile data collection can do. But then you get some good, you still get some good assistance from the platform people. If you get stuck, for example, we are using data winners in Ghana, and they are really, really good. They are available at all time to answer our question on Skype. Whenever we try to upload an XLS data collection form to be uploaded on the platform, to appear on the mobile, we just send the form to them and ask them, could you help us find the error, because it shows an error, it doesn't want to upload, and they will fix it for you right away. And then when you are very familiar with all this, then you can use OGK, the free platform. And among the OGK system, you also have several options to pick. And depending on the capacity of your team, you will select the ones. But at this point, it's more the capacity and the needs that will matter, I would say, and consider the number of users as well. For example, OGK Aggregate has a really high number of users. So if you get stuck, you can reach out to those people. So yeah, that's about it. Maybe I was a little bit long. I'll be happy to answer any question.
Thank you very much, Neri. Yes, we already have some questions coming in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your practical insight from an implementer viewpoint. We now also like to ask a platform provider for their insight, and we're pleased to have Lori from Salesforce.org joining us, and she will share insights on what are the key commonalities of successful implementations and platform users she sees within their NGO client base. So Lori, thank you for sharing your insights.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. Thank you for the opportunity to share with the folks on the phone today, and hopefully folks on the phone today sharing with other folks in the sector within your organizations and other orgs that you collaborate with. So as I thought about this question and in preparation for today, there are a number of different areas that we've seen that are valuable to share with other organizations, and some of them are sort of fall into the camp of sort of themes of values that you would use to kind of approach the work, and some of them are more tactical things. So I narrowed down my gigantic list to just 4 things, and 2 of them are more of the tactical and 2 of them are more of the values. But the most important one, I would say, which is really a value that I'll start from, is the organizations that we see the most success with are organizations who have a commitment throughout the organization to technology as a strategy. So what do I mean by that? If you're an organization who has, either by design or by practical resources been using Excel for everything, Excel is, for all intents and purposes, a very low cost, if not free, almost free solution that solves a lot of problems in the absence of a formal solution. But if you're an organization that's decided to make the leap to start to look at more sophisticated tools like platforms, hopefully that comes from a place of making thoughtful choices about, kind of creating a culture of data and thinking through how you want to use the data that you're capturing, and not just from the perspective of being able to report out what you did, but to be able to make smarter decisions and to be able to use data to collaborate with other organizations and to drive more efficiencies. So the organizations that we see being most successful in using platforms are those organizations who sort of have you know, chosen to, from an org structure perspective and from a technology or overall operating budget, they've chosen to prioritize technology as a strategic component. So it's not something that's a single line item on their budget. Rather, it's something that's inherent to all of the decisions that they're making in every part of the organization. So a recent customer mentioned to me that they don't have a chief digital officer because everyone in the organization should be thinking about digital. And that really kind of represents the spirit of having technology as a strategy. So that's probably the most important key that we've seen that separates organizations. The second one is more of a pragmatic, tactical thing, and that's the formality that organizations bring around really knowing their users and thinking proactively about the internal users that they have and the external users that they have for the data, and going through exercises to identify personas and journeys. So, you know, getting in a room with Post-its and writing out, no matter what the process is that you're looking at to reform and change from the data collection perspective, mapping out, okay, from the very first moment that the user starts to think through this data, or users in many cases, what is that experience like? And having, you know, a picture that's an enterprise resource diagram of all of your systems right now that are involved to connect things. More often than not, we've worked with organizations who start using our solutions, and they may have one part of their organization that they want to transform. So they start, you know, documenting all these various systems. And the organizations who are able to accurately document, you know, with a fair amount of specificity, all the different systems that are in play in their environment and the kind of experience that they want to create for their constituents are by far the organizations that are most successful, because they thought about what's the experience that we're trying to create, and, you know, what is the right business process that should flow. So many organizations have been beholden to legacy technology solutions that have dictated, first you do this, then you do that, then you do this. And if you're going to choose a platform, then you want to take an approach that's based on your business needs and what's going to be most successful for your users. Third thing that's a consistent component is executive buy-in, and that means all the way to the board, right? If you're an organization that's looking to be able to embrace and adopt a platform, that probably means that your organization is going to go through a fair amount of change. And as your organization goes through that change, you want to have alignment cross-functionally across all of the different parts of the organization to be able to address the challenging moments, because any kind of technology change like this, or sort of a philosophical change like this, you're going to have moments where folks are resistant to the current, or changing from the current state to the future state, and folks on your executive team, you know, validating the value of making these shifts, and then also making sure that you have the appropriate resources, and folks in the organization who have experience doing this are just going to be more important assets. And then finally, the last piece that I'll offer is really just something that's more of a value, and that's the organizations who are choosing, you know, to think about their platform usage through technology, who approach the problem or the opportunity from a collaborative place, and, you know, reach out and work with other organizations who've gone through similar projects. So many of you who are NetHope members already obviously identify with this value. But the piece that kind of takes it a little bit further is, if you're choosing to use a platform, make sure you're also thinking about and talking with other organizations about collaboration and open and sharing data across organizations, and if that's something that makes sense. Because if you're sort of back at the drawing board or thinking through this future state, the data that you're collecting, the data that we collect as a sector, there aren't a lot of standards. So any opportunity to collaborate and work together around those things is immensely valuable. So I think I've gone a little bit over on my time, Sonia, but hopefully those 4 areas will help organizations as they, you know, sort of go down this journey.
Thank you very much, Lori. Thank you for your insight. I think that's a very good move to our next question. Talking about collaboration, it usually brings up the question around data security and privacy. So Priscilla, I would like to ask you, what are the key considerations or actions to secure or to ensure or improve data security and privacy? And if you can share some insights.
Indeed, Laurie's last comment does feed very nicely into what I was going to say. But before I go into that, I think first of all, you have to make sure that as we look at mobile data collection tools, particularly, that you have the basics covered. As Neri mentioned, we sometimes need to go externally and look for suppliers. So from the very beginning, it's really, really important to ask your suppliers some really key questions, such as where are their servers located, what sort of encryption are they using, how well backed up. Those are the basics of data security, like is their backup reliable, or do you need to have your own in-house methods of backing up? When they give you the sort of encryption, take the time to try and figure out whether this actually makes sense or it's some simple encryption that somebody can go on Google and break. So those are the basics. And I find that a lot of the service providers already have that covered. For the purposes of this conversation, I think what we as organizations need to really pay attention to is what our practices in-house are. I'm with DCA, and when I joined 3 years ago, we worked through local NGOs, so a lot of our partners didn't have any data collection platforms. So we made a decision to say we're going to use Magpie, no more pen and paper, and that's all great. But then we start to run into questions like, how do we get all these people in all these different countries to start to understand why data privacy is important? How do we roll out sort of a change management process that allows them to appreciate the fact that they are, for example, in a refugee context. And that's a very sensitive environment. Just to give an example, I was in one of the refugee camps, and somebody mentioned that, oh, I actually prefer to be in the refugee camp because if I go out there, there might be people looking for me based on where I'm coming from. Now, somebody like that is really, really in a very volatile situation. We are then walking to their house and asking them for their name, their last name, their age, their ward number, their village number, their whatever number, how many children they have. And then some partner or some member of staff in our organization is going to print all this information out on an Excel spreadsheet and put it on the desk and leave it lying around right there. So those are some of the other things we really need to pay attention to, and those are the things that give me sleepless nights. I kind of know we're using Magpie as a platform, so I know we've covered that part of how are they encrypting their data, how are they storing it, where's the server located. But when it comes to the little basics that we overlook, how much personally identifiable information are we collecting? Can we collect less? If we can't collect less, how do we then make sure that whatever we are putting out there is aggregated to a level where it's sort of anonymized enough? We also need to start negotiating with our donors and other people who are placing demands on the data that they want from us. Conversations such as how long do we retain the data are really, really important, because sometimes we don't know. We have a project that ends today and auditors are only coming in 5 years' time. Should we keep all the data? Should we keep pieces of the data? Those are the negotiations we need to start having. We also need to really train our staff and our partners and whoever's handling the data on the importance of privacy and on things like, if you're going to talk consent, what really is informed consent, particularly in our context? If I'm giving you aid, and for example, it's cash, we do a lot of cash programming, I have certain requirements from the banking systems or whoever my financial service provider is with KYC, which is know your customer or know your client. I have to ask you for certain pieces of information. Now, when I go to a setting where somebody doesn't have many options and they desperately need my cash, what does informed consent mean? Do they really consent, or is it because they know if they don't give me this information, I will not give them their help that they need in that desperate moment? So those are the things I think we need to really be considering and working as organizations to sort of understand and work better at. In terms of sharing data, I really, really am a big advocate of sharing data. And I know this might sound counterintuitive, but the fact that you're going to share with other people will likely force you to think a lot more about anonymizing and aggregating and what am I collecting and what can I share, what are the trust issues that exist between me and this other organization? So those are also some of the other discussions we need to start having of how do we collaborate, how do we share data, how do we reduce the burden on the people we're collecting the data from in terms of 6 different organizations collecting the same pieces of data while still making sure that they're secure, the data is secure, and that their privacy is protected. I think those are the main comments I had on that topic. Allow me to digress. I think I have 1 more minute that I can. And there's a question on here which is unrelated to security and privacy, but is asking about when you choose mobile data collection tools, do you select what's best fit for purpose, or is it more important to standardize on a single or one platform across all your use cases? From my experience, it is not an either-or situation. For us, when we came on board, like I said, a lot of our implementing partners were using pen and paper, so we took a strategic decision to go with one platform for everybody. This allowed us to roll it out much faster, standardize our training, content, and materials, and we could provide support from a very small resource base at headquarters. However, as we've gone ahead, we realized that no single data collection tool can give you everything you need in every context, particularly if you work across a wide range of fields and things like that. What people need when they're collecting data on health might be very different when you're collecting data on landmines. So as we've gone on, we fronted one platform, but we've now reached a stage where the users are sophisticated enough to start to migrate to other platforms. So then we now have some recommendations to say, if you're working in this context, these are the sort of tools you should look at. If you're working in this context, it's okay for you to go and use Kobo or use something that meets your needs, that has a mapping functionality that's more sophisticated than what perhaps Magpie can offer. So that would be my answer to this. However, in terms of analytics and visualizations, I would say try and standardize as much as you can.
Thank you, Priscilla. That is already the perfect transition to our next question, when we like to ask Brian Sobel from CRS to share his insights on how to decide between centralized or decentralized approach for their platforms. So Brian, over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts on this, and just to say I've been very impressed with all of the panelists this far on the quality of your responses, and certainly big shoes to fill. Hopefully I can live up. So I'm an agriculture technical advisor, and so this answer is going to pertain largely to our agriculture programmings, but is not exclusive to the other sectors. Our agriculture programming at CRS is global, with 128 projects in 43 different countries, directly serving 9.3 million people at last count. That is sort of a moving target. Furthermore, we operate under the principle of subsidiarity, which means that a higher level of government or organization should not perform any function or duty that can be handled more effectively at a lower level by people who are closer to the problem and have a better understanding of the issue. So just with all that information, it's to say that we are very much leaning towards decentralized approaches sort of off the bat, and that it's really a challenge to provide a sort of a standardized approach that we can use to have for data aggregation across our different projects. That's also to say, though, that a lot of these projects are really big projects, and those that are sort of on the ground in the day-to-day have infinite number of tasks that they're completing. They're incredibly busy managing these large projects, and so they don't always have time to sit down and really take a close look at the data to understand trends and be able to pick out a more detailed and nuanced understanding of what's going on. So we try to support what we call a minimum standard of the data model. So we have sort of a core set of questions that are the same to all surveys, all projects, and then have a layer of customization that makes the survey unique to the specific context or situation with which it's being applied. And this allows us to have set up a model where the data is being collected in the field. They're able to customize it based on their needs, but then the data can be sent back to headquarters for further analysis. And in order to, we can aggregate it into our agency level metrics, but also provide some more nuanced understanding of the data to feed back into projects for their strategic decision making and reporting and understanding. So yeah, I think, I don't want to take up too much of the time, but we are trying to be as centralized as possible, as decentralized as possible to be able to be adaptive to our project's needs, while maintaining a sort of key point of centralization for secondary analyses, reporting, and data aggregation.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
We have one more question for Natasha around training, and then we'll take questions from the audience. I can see already a lot in the chat room, so keep them going. Even if we don't get through all of them, we will put together a Q&A document afterwards. So Natasha, we'd like to ask you, how do you advise organization to best go about training their colleagues, or partners, or end users, ideally without too much technical jargon?
Okay, great. Yeah. So just a quick background on me. Before I joined CEGA, the Center for Effective Global Action at UC Berkeley, I was an implementer. I was a practitioner, and my job was basically to train field teams on how to use technical tools for M&E purposes. So I have an M&E background, although I'm now on the research side of the MERL acronym. In research, we also use a ton of mobile data collection tools, usually enumerators doing tons of household surveys, but increasingly we're doing SMS and IVR surveys as well. So I run quite a few different kinds of trainings for different levels of user in the field all the time. And there's a few kind of general rules that I think apply regardless of who you're training and kind of how experienced they may be with digital tools. I think one thing I wanted to just quickly mention is, so I have a teaching background. Way back in the day, I used to be a teacher, and one thing that's really important when you're doing training is to really try to think about how different kinds of users learn. So one thing I like to hark back to is this guy by the name of Howard Gardner kind of came up with this theory of multiple intelligences in a 1983 book. And he basically says that people learn in different ways, right? So you might be a verbal linguistic learner, or you might be someone who learns through music, or you might be someone who learns through kind of mathematics and logical reasoning, or you might be someone who learns by doing something. So there's different ways to learn the same set of skills, and making sure that you include in any training that you do, whether it be your coworkers or field teams, or whether it be kind of end users like community health workers or enumerators or agricultural extension workers, whoever it is that you're training, really thinking about the fact that there's diversity within that group, there's diversity of learning styles within that group, and trying to make sure that your training includes different types of methods of teaching the same concept over and over again, so that you ensure that every member of that group is able to, absorb whatever it is you're trying to train them on. So that's kind of one quick thing to think about. And then in terms of really training basics, I've done a lot of workshops and training, either field teams or enumerators, and I think that you need to make sure that you allot enough time. I think it's, with budgets, as people mentioned earlier, making sure that you have enough budget for a certain kind of tool. You also need to make sure you have a certain amount of budget for the training itself. Training takes quite a few days, so saying okay, we have 24 hours, we're going to do it in one day because that's how much the budget allows for in terms of, per diems and whatever else, you're not going to get a very effective training if you rush it. So making sure that you allot, days, if not at least a whole week, and enough resources to the training, making sure that you never train more than 15 people per session. I like to think of technical trainings as language trainings, You would never want to have a language class that has more than 15 people in it. You never want to have a training that has more than 15 people in it. Making sure that you're like fully prepped for your training beforehand, and if you're using devices, making sure those are all prepared as well. One thing I want to say is always to try to train in the local language. So that may mean you need to conduct a training of trainers. So for example, say you're training a field team in Niger and you don't speak French, and so you have a colleague who speaks French and English. I would train that colleague first in how to do it and then have them conduct it in French. I think it's not a very good use of time to have someone in real time translating you if you're doing the training. So making sure that someone who's prepared to do the training in the local language is ready to go. Using local terms, so I like to solicit local terms for either mobile features or IVR or SMS, depending upon what people use in their local language, and using those throughout the rest of the training. And making sure that you don't take anything for granted. Don't assume that your team knows how to use certain, that your enumerators know how to use certain kinds of tools. Always kind of assume that no one knows anything and go by that, because it's okay to go over something they already know, but it's not okay to skip something they may not know. And then just a real quick thing, making sure that you ask a lot of questions, constantly ask questions. I think a lot of times when we do trainings, we have the tendency to ask the question, do you understand? Does that make sense? And then when you ask a yes or no question, your trainees inevitably are always going to say, yes, yes, I understand, or yes, yes, that makes sense, even if it doesn't and they don't understand. So always making sure that whenever you're running a training that you ask questions that are very specific, like how do I turn the mobile phone off and on again? What do I do if I receive this kind of SMS? How do I move to the next point in the IVR menu? Like whatever it is, make sure that you ask specific questions and get them to give you specific answers back. And then finally, I would say most people learn by doing, so as many demonstrations, role plays that you can include in your training is really important. I used to train folks on how to use SMS and IVR platforms, and I would have them like create like a fake, IVR platform that would be all about like some fun topic, like how to determine what the best Bollywood movie is. And then, they would spend like 2-3 hours like putting together that IVR system, and then we would test it. And so that is an easier way of making sure that they've kind of gained the skills that they needed to from the training. And then just kind of monitoring these kind of deployments in the future, I would say always make sure that you devote resources to doing not just an initial training, but refresher trainings, whether that be with your field staff or with enumerators or, like I said, mobile workers in the field. Make sure that you have regular check-ins with everybody who's using these tools, and you're able to answer their questions or, use online resources, like if you're using ODK, what kind of online platforms can you get resources for, and making sure that everybody who's supervising the person who's using the technical tool is also familiar with the tool, and then making sure that you define staff roles and responsibilities for the deployment, who is in charge of doing something if there's a technical problem, who's in charge of troubleshooting, what is the kind of order of protocol for having a technical problem in the field. So making sure all that is kind of set and ready to go when you start, I think will help have a more successful technical deployment.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for your insights and your practical advice. And yeah, thank you to all the speakers for their initial insights. We're now taking questions from the audience and go chronological. I know some have already been answered throughout the chat, so also have a look through the chat, as well as we will provide a post-webinar document. So my first question is, maybe I can ask Neri first, but then also after that, any other speaker that would like to add a comment, please let me know. The first question would be about a multi-tool approach. So what considerations should one make when incorporating a new platform to complement a current in-house system? Or how do you work with multiple tools? Neri, do you have some advice for us on this?
Yeah, multiple tools I quite didn't get, like multiple data collection platforms, for example. I would say just a matter of compatibility, right? That's an English word, right? Meaning that for example, for our organization, for the CDI VOCA, we have one project using one platform and another project using another platform. But just that the collection phase, we store the data, all data collected, in one centralized database. So having that ability of store in one centralized place could be one of the criteria. As well, putting standards across projects. That's something we do. Meaning, like when you apply, when you use your platform, you have to follow this and this and this, all the steps. You have to train, you have to pilot and test, you have to upload your data, you have to do A, B, C, D to check the quality. You have to reach out to your, so we have M&E person in the field, and we have regional, region-based, like in Africa, etc. M&E person, so reach out to those people to make sure that the forms that you used are fully answering your data needs. And for us, the data needs vary from one project to the other. So it's really important that they have their own tools, and context in one country is different from another country, where technological profile and everything else vary. That's why we had that. We offered that option of different platforms, but the only condition is that they have to be compatible with our server in terms of the output of the data that gets out of the platform. And the second is that they follow our internal monitoring and evaluation policy regarding data quality assurance processes and procedures.
Thank you. Any of the other panel speakers would like to add a comment around assisting interoperability?
Sonia, there was a comment that was came in actually from Brian that I rebroadcast, and Brian said that for Catholic Relief Services, ComCare is our agency standard through some projects using other platforms such as CS Pro, but ComCare allows for cloud-based synchronization where headquarters can access the data from on the back end. So just another comment on, yes, you may be using multiple different tools, but an important thing is that you try to, as best as you can, to get all the data in one place. And that's probably also where you set things up for more meaningful analytics, visualization, and decision-making as well.
Yes, thank you, Frederick. I'm sorry, I'm still figuring out this WebEx platform, but it really comes down to the data model to ensure the interoperability between different platforms, so that when data is coming in, it can be integrated into the analysis without excessive cleaning. And then furthermore, when we have this back-end access to the data, we can have another level of oversight for part of our data quality assurance mechanisms. So it provides really great opportunity to encourage the decentralization while maintaining some visibility and oversight over the data.
Thank you, Brian. I guess another question that is sort of linked is if there is or how implementers or NGOs approach a common M&E framework for ICT4D or other regular projects. Obviously, all these projects are unique and different, but are there any recommendations for a more standardized approach? Do we have Do you have any contributions to that question?
Natasha mentioned that she's been doing M&E frameworks in the past. I don't know if it's fair to put Natasha on the spot here.
Sorry, I was just looking at, I think it's hard when you have so many panelists. I was like, who's going to speak in? Sorry, I was just looking at the side chat. Can you just repeat the question real quick for me?
It's if you have any recommendations about sort of an M&E framework for platforms, or maybe even ICT4D more general.
I think M&E frameworks are so specific to your project. I would have a hard time coming up with like a larger M&E framework that's specifically about the tool rather than whatever it is in terms of outcomes that you're actually looking to measure. I think frameworks should ideally be about the outcomes, not the tools that you're using to determine what those outcomes are. But in terms of kind of general guidelines or whatever for using M&E tools, I think making sure that you're looking at something that's like culturally appropriate, that you're looking at something that's you know, sensitive to what's going on. One thing I wanted to mention, this kind of touches on some of Priscilla's points that she was making earlier about really understanding data privacy, is a lot of times when you're using tools and even choosing between tools, as Neri was talking about, it's important to think about what might be appropriate. So I remember working on some projects that were looking at IPV, interpersonal violence, in Nepal and Yemen. And, you know, there were different things, like the donor was like, oh, we can like send text messages to the women. And it was like, no, because then if their husbands or their fathers see that they're getting messages about like women's empowerment, it may, you know, cause conflict rather than trying to prevent conflict, which is what the project was trying to do. Or sending messages to folks in, you know, certain parts of Afghanistan from, you know, like a USAID-backed organization, and can also be certain, you know, sensitive issues. So thinking about, you know, security concerns, privacy concerns, ethical concerns of using these things, like if you're going to be calling someone and giving them IVR messages, how is that going to look to other folks? If you're looking at certain populations, you know, that may be more vulnerable or more marginalized, making sure that you think about those things in a larger kind of framework as well in terms of choosing the tool and implementing it. So that doesn't really answer the question, but it's a tangential thing I wanted to mention.
You brought up privacy, and there was a question on that that came in earlier. It was for Priscilla, but anyone can jump in. Are there educational resources teaching how to collect, store, and analyze personally identifiable information responsibly?
Yes, and I'll throw this back to you, Frederick, because you probably know a lot more about this than me as NetHope. But yes, there are. My favorite go-to is the work done by Oxfam, because they have done some very simplified sort of learning resources. I will try and find the link and just put it in the chat box. I was actually just looking it up just now. But if you go to their website and just look at Oxfam data protection, maybe, I think, if you just Google that, you will be taken to their site. And they do have like cards that you can use. They have some content that you can use in your training. And I think I would also say, talk to whoever in your organization is looking at the GDPR process, because what most organizations I know have done is that they've outsourced this expertise. Those guys are also able to give you some really good insights into what you should focus on. That would be my quick response to that.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. I would now, I think it's very clear that there's no solution that fits everyone, and there's also clearly no advice that fits every program, but I thank you very much for your very practical insights. I would like to ask now just all the speakers a sort of a final comment of what is the key lesson learned, or what is the key trend you're seeing, and try to keep it very short. And now what I will do is I go according to well, the picture we're seeing here. So starting with Duncan, what is sort of the key trend you're seeing at the moment?
Yes, no, a key trend, I think, and perhaps the thing that people need to think about is reorienting their thinking around around the data, around the collection of the, away from the collection of the data and more towards how the data is going to be used. I think that's probably the most important trend that we're expecting to see.
Thank you, Duncan. And Neri, do you have a key lesson learned you like to share with our audience, or trend?
Key lesson learned. I would say, despite the fact that mobile data collection has been around for a while now, there is still a need pretty much to demystify it. And what Lori mentioned was really a quick key point, meaning that we need to have the buy-in of the leadership. We need to demystify what is, because people who are not familiar with it think it's something really complicated, well, actually it's not at all. And so demystify through sensitizations, through trainings, through different opportunities within the organization. Another lesson learned as well for us is there is no need to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of resources, a lot of even data collection forms, etc., available out there. Reach out to people and take advantage of what is there. And maybe a third final lesson learned is pilot first at small scale. Whatever you do, that is just like any innovation. You need to pilot, and that during that pilot, that small scale data collection or analysis that you're doing, if you do data collection, still use paper as a backup, because you don't want to, if there is any problem in the upload of the data, in the whatever it's happening with the tablet or the smartphone, just for the few days of piloting, use paper as backup and be patient, because innovation some are change agents. It's going to be quick for them to pick it up. You have early adopters, you have the slower ones. So get a champion out there and focus on those champions first and ask them to share before you scale it up. So that's the few I can have in mind for the moment. I can add more if needed.
Thank you. And Lori, do you have any final comment for us as well?
Yeah, I'll talk about trends. I think without a doubt, it's this conversation that's happening at every level, whether it's organization to organization, or funder to funder, or government to organization, around how we pull data to get together and see what, just look to get like a progress report, and then in hope of getting a better tool to see what's working and what's not working. And my hope would be that all of that's starting to drive a conversation around standards. So definitely how organizations are going to share data practically, as well as all the concerns around privacy, and then what, all the amazing things that could happen for all of that.
Excellent. Thank you, Lori. I'd like to mention that Salesforce.org are also organizing a webinar on platforms at the end of this month, on the 31st of October. I've just posted the information here, and we will also share it afterwards. We're already at the end of the hour, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers very much for their practical insights, and also for everybody for attending this webinar. We will be back in November, when we're talking about AI and machine learning and health programs. And I also like to share that we're just about to open the call for speakers for the next, the 11th ICT4D conference, which will take place on April the 30th to May 3rd in Kampala, Uganda. We'll also share that link. So thank you very much all for attending, and thank you very much for NetHope for facilitating this for us.
Thank you very much, Sonia. This has been very interesting, and I thank you, all the presenters today, and the audience for terrific questions and interaction. We did run out of time, so we will be working on a Q&A document that we'll be posting to the webinar page later this week. So I wish everybody a great rest of your day. Keep an eye on the Solutions Center and the webinar listings there for interesting sessions coming up in the future. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.